I never imagined that a single night could change my entire life. 3 months later, I was standing before the most feared man in Philadelphia, trying to find the courage to reveal that I was carrying his child. But instead of joy, I was met with suspicion. Surrounded by mafia men, I heard the question that destroyed me from the inside: who got you pregnant? What he didn't expect was my answer. And what I didn't expect was that this cold, dangerous man would end up becoming the only person capable of making me believe in family again. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, The Night That Shouldn't Have Happened. The gallery smelled of fresh varnish and cheap wine served in expensive glasses. I'd been on my feet for 11 hours, with dried paint under my nails and an argument on the tip of my tongue that would never come out. The client, a collector from Connecticut who confused restoration with touch-up, had demanded that I brighten the blue of a 17th century fresco to match the couch in his living room. I smiled. I said I'd think about it. I grabbed my bag and left. Manhattan was damp with a fine rain that felt more like an opinion than weather. I walked 3 blocks to the Belmore Hotel with my coat open, letting the cold remind me that there was still a body beneath all that exhaustion. The puddles reflected the signs with the beautiful indifference of things that don't have to try hard to impress. The plan was to go straight up to the suite, take off my clothes, sleep. That was the plan. The Belmore's lobby had a grand piano, and no one playing it. The dark carpet muffled everyone's footsteps. Executives with briefcases, a couple of tourists with printed maps, a receptionist who smiled at me as if she'd been trained to do it since childhood. I crossed the whole thing with the feeling that I needed a drink before facing the silence of the room. And it was in that exact mix of exhaustion and indecision that I bumped into him. It wasn't a small bump. I was looking at my phone. He was coming out of the bar, and the glass in my hand decided to leap onto his chest. Oh my God. I stepped back half a pace. I'm sorry. The man looked down at the white shirt where the whiskey had spread into the shape of a map. Then he looked at me, and that's when I noticed 2 things at the same time. First, that he was tall in a way that seemed like a choice, not an accident. Second, that his eyes were the shade of black coffee with no sugar, dark, attentive, in no hurry to explain themselves. I didn't mean to ruin your night, I said. You haven't yet. His voice came out low, with a trace of an accent that wasn't from the north. The night was already being ruined before you arrived. Are you sure it was the night and not the shirt? He looked down at his own shirt. He smiled a little. It was a tiny smile, the kind that seems expensive because the person doesn't hand it out freely. The shirt I can change, he said. The night? I can't. I can pay for the dry cleaning. You can buy me a drink. I left the bar because the bartender thought I wanted to talk. And you didn't. I wanted silence. He pointed to an empty armchair near the window, where the rain trickled slowly down the glass. But I just changed my mind. I should have left. That was exactly the thought I had as I sat down in the armchair across from his. I should have gone up to suite 1402, shut the door, and slept with the paint still under my nails. Instead, I ordered a Negroni from the waiter who appeared without being called, and looked at the man in the stained shirt as if my exhaustion had suddenly turned into curiosity. I'm Ottavia, I said. Gennaro. No last name. Not tonight. I laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised at myself. For months I hadn't laughed at anything other than a joke from Sienna over the phone. And there, in a hotel lobby where I'd just spilled whiskey on a stranger, something inside my chest took a step back to look at the scene. All right, Gennaro no last name. I crossed my legs. What's ruining your night? People, he answered. It's always people. How profound. I'm not in the mood to be profound. He took the glass the waiter brought without taking his eyes off me. I'm in the mood to be precise. And what's the difference? Profound takes time. Precise solves it. I looked at him longer than I should have. There was something about that man that didn't fit hotel lobbies. The suit was too dark, the watch too discreet, the shoulders too tense. He seemed like the type of person who walked into a room already mapping all the exits. But the look he gave back to me was in no hurry at all. It was a look that stayed. And what did you come to solve in New York? I asked. A meeting that ended too quickly. He turned the glass slowly, like someone who needs something to do with his hands but won't admit it. And you? Don't call me ma'am. I'm 29 years old with a joint in my neck that cracks. Ma'am sounds worse than the cracking. Ottavia, then. I came to work, restoring a fresco at a gallery in Chelsea. A restorer. Yes. You fix what time destroyed. I try. Does it work? Sometimes. I took a sip. The Negroni had the right bitterness, just the way I like it. And for a second, I wondered whether that hotel had the proportions decorated for show, or whether the bartender was actually good. Some things time didn't destroy. We destroyed them first, and there's no fixing that. He looked at me differently. It was quick, almost invisible, but I noticed it. Go on, he said. Go on with what? The sentence. You held something back. I don't know you. That's the point. I looked out the window. The rain had picked up, turning the sidewalk outside into a surface of broken mirrors. A couple ran beneath a shared coat, laughing with their mouths wide open, not caring about their soaked clothes. I hadn't run with anyone under any coat for almost 3 years, and the realization went straight through me without asking permission. My name is Ottavia Romano, I said, still not looking at him. I fix paintings because it's the only thing I know how to fix, and I came to New York because, in Boston, I still run into my old life at the supermarket. Who is the old life? A man who called himself a businessman. He was something else. What else? The worst version of something else. He stayed silent. Not the way people stay silent when they don't know what to say. The way people stay silent when they understand, and when they decide that understanding is enough, that they don't need to ask anymore. You left? He said. I left. Does it still hurt? It hurt more before. That's not an answer. I know. The second drink came without my asking. So did the third. At some point the conversation turned to other things. He talked about an Italian town where his grandmother had been born. I talked about a chapel in Ravenna where I nearly cried in front of a gilded 5th century mosaic. He laughed at a joke of mine about rich collectors who buy art the way they buy wallpaper. I laughed at a joke of his about lawyers who charge for their silence. There was something about that little table, in the yellow light of the lobby, and the distant sound of the rain, that made everything easier than it should have been. He didn't ask me anything that could hurt me. I didn't ask him anything that could hurt him. It was a silent agreement, stitched together with whiskey, between two people who recognized, without saying so, that they were tired of the same thing. What time is it? I asked. He looked at his watch. Been 1:12. I have a flight in the morning. I know. I didn't say so. You said you're staying here. People only stay in a hotel when they're leaving. I stood up. The Negroni shifted the floor for a second before I remembered how to step straight. He stood up too, unhurried, and the gesture had something polite about it and something of a contained threat, like everything about him. That was nice, I said. It was. Good night. Gennaro, no last name. Good night, Ottavia Romano. I walked to the elevator, feeling his gaze on my back like a hand. I pressed the button for the 14th floor. The doors closed with a soft, definitive sound. I rested my head against the cold mirror of the elevator and closed my eyes. The reflection behind me showed a woman in an open coat, hair slightly damp from the rain, lipstick that no longer existed. She looked like a person who had just remembered something important, and when the doors opened, I did something I never imagined I would do. I pressed the ground floor again. I went down. I crossed the lobby. He was still there, standing near the window, looking at the rain as if the rain were the only conversation left. Hands in his pockets, shoulders still, completely motionless the way only people very used to waiting can be. He saw me coming. He didn't look surprised. I forgot something, I said. What? To decide. His gaze dropped to my mouth and came back to my eyes. It was a short movement, but I felt the heat of it at my temples, sliding slowly down to my throat. Then decide now, he said, and I decided. We went up together. The elevator seemed smaller than it had 5 minutes earlier, the mirror multiplying the two of us and neither of us looking at it. He rested his hand on the wall beside my head, without touching me, without coming close, just there, and his breathing altered mine in a way that had no name. In the hallway, he walked half a step behind me, letting me reach the door first. I slid the card. The green light blinked. I looked at him one last time before going in. There's still time for you to leave, I said. I know. Why don't you? For the same reason you didn't. The door of Suite 1402 closed behind the two of us. I woke before him. The room was in the gray light of morning that comes before the sun, that convictionless brightness that doesn't yet know whether it will become day. The sheet covered the half of him that slept face down, his broad arms stretched across the pillow as if taking up space were a reflex. I sat there for a full minute, my feet on the cold carpet, watching this man I didn't know breathe heavily into the pillow. There was a thin scar on the side of his back, another, wider one on his right shoulder, with the texture of something that had been serious. I hadn't seen them the night before, or I'd seen them and hadn't registered because there were other things demanding attention. I thought about touching them. I didn't. The phone on the nightstand showed 5:47. My flight left at 8. If I stayed 5 more minutes, I wouldn't leave. I knew that with the same clarity I knew there was dried paint under my nails. I knew it because I felt, in my chest, that this sleeping man was exactly the kind of thing I had sworn not to let in again. Not because he was dangerous, because he was easy. Easy in the way that hurts later, when you realize the ease was the trap. I got up. I put on yesterday's clothes. I grabbed my bag. I went to the door. Before opening it, I looked back one last time. He was still asleep. I left without leaving a note, without leaving a number, without leaving a name. The cab to the airport took 25 minutes. I watched the city go by through the window with the feeling of having dreamed something that hurt a little and illuminated a lot. And I arrived in Boston at 10 in the morning with my life exactly where I'd left it. 3 months later, I was standing in the bathroom of my apartment in Boston, looking at a pregnancy test that had 2 lines where there should have been 1. I closed my eyes. I opened them. The lines were still there. And for the first time in 3 years, I thought about the name of a man whose last name I didn't know. Chapter 2. The Question That Cut Through the Room. I know. Sienna lifted the box from the bathroom shelf as if she were holding criminal evidence. No. Ottavia Romano. Is this what I think it is? I hadn't told her she was coming to dinner with me. She decided on her own that she was. She showed up at my door with a bottle of red wine, 2 containers of fresh pasta from an Italian place in the North End, and the conviction that I was depressed because I'd turned down a project in Venice. Within 15 minutes, she was in my bathroom taking off her earring and discovered the test box in the trash, which I had badly covered with a tissue. Sienna. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, my cold hands on my knees. No wine. Not tonight. She looked at me. She looked at the box. She looked at me again. Her mouth opened, closed, opened, and when the sentence finally came out, it was in a whisper she couldn't quite pull off. Holy shit. I know. Holy shit. Ottavia. I know. Whose is it? New York. New York when? New York 3 months ago. The whiskey man. The whiskey man. She sat down on the bathroom floor with the elegance of someone who'd fallen, leaned her back against the wall under the sink, and stared at the ceiling for a stretch of time. That felt longer than it was. The white tile was cold, and the ceiling light cast harsh shadows under her eyes. She stayed quiet like that for almost a full minute, her arms crossed over her lap, as if she needed time to rearrange everything she knew about me. I'm going to tell you something, she said, without taking her eyes off the ceiling. I work with 17th century sacred fabric. I've spent entire nights sewing a bishop's cope with an eyelash needle. Nothing in my life prepared me for the sentence you just said to me. Sienna, do you know his last name? No. Do you have his number? No. Do you have anything of his? I have a city, Philadelphia. He mentioned Philadelphia 3 times that night. He said he was flying back on the morning plane. Philadelphia. She took a deep breath, slowly, like someone doing the math in her head. Okay, Philadelphia is a city. It's not Siberia. We can work with Philadelphia. I'm not going after him. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Say that again. I'm not going after him. Ottavia, I'm going to have this baby. Alone. Like I do everything. I've already saved up. I've done the math. I can move to a smaller apartment in Alston. I can take on more weekend projects. I can ask the school for an extension. You can also give the guy a chance to know there's a child in the world. He doesn't owe me anything. He owes half a chromosome, honey. Sienna, you're doing it again. She knelt down and took both of my hands, her palms warm against my icy fingers. You're deciding you can carry it alone because you've already carried worse alone. That's not how you live. That's not how you raise a child. I didn't answer. I squeezed her hand and looked at the floor tile. The grout lines darkened near the drain. Lucian had taught me, over 2 years, that asking a man for anything was opening a door that never closed again. He had taught me that being taken care of came at a high price. He had taught me that dependence was an elegant name for a leash. I had walked out of that house 3 years earlier with 1 suitcase, an empty bank account, and the silent promise never again to ask any man for permission over my own fate. But that man at the Belmore hadn't asked anything of me. He had only talked. He had only asked what I'd held back in that sentence, with the quiet patience of someone used to waiting for difficult truths. And I, 3 months later, was carrying a piece of him inside my body, and it seemed dishonest not to tell him. I'll tell him, I said. Sienna closed her eyes. She pressed her forehead to mine. Thank God. But that's it. I'll tell him. I won't ask for anything. He decides whether he wants to be involved or not. All right? I mean it, Sienna. I know you mean it. I'm not going to become an alimony case for a man with a mansion. Honey, she lifted her head. You wouldn't know how to be an alimony case even if the man were the president. Relax. I called her the next night to say I'd bought the train ticket. Boston to Philadelphia. Friday, first afternoon departure. Sienna didn't make a joke. She just asked if I wanted her to come along. I said no. Some truths need to arrive without a witness. I arrived at 30th Street Station just before 5 in the afternoon. The city had that golden late afternoon light of autumn that makes the stones look ancient. The long shadows over asphalt damp from a passing rain I'd missed. I took a cab and gave the only address I'd managed to get after 2 weeks of asking favors from a friend who had cousins who covered organized crime for a Boston newspaper. The Caputo Mansion, on the far north end of the city, in a neighborhood that had gates before the houses. The cab driver looked at me in the rearview mirror when I gave the address and asked if I was sure. I said I was. He didn't speak again until he stopped the car. The gate was made of dark iron. An eagle with lowered wings worked in wrought iron at the center, the metal worn at the points where generations of hands had pushed it. I got out of the cab, paid, and stood in the middle of the sidewalk with the leather bag hanging from my shoulder and the feeling that I'd been walking for 3 months to reach this place. The October wind smelled of wet earth and old leaves, the kind of smell that tightens your throat for no reason. The man on the intercom had a heavy accent. Yes, I need to speak with Gennaro Caputo. Who is this? Ottavia Romano. Do you have an appointment? No. Then you're not coming in. Tell him it's about New York. Silence. A silence that lasted longer than it should have, with the October wind brushing the iron of the gate in a low, continuous rustle. After a minute, I heard footsteps on the gravel on the other side. A man, tall, thin, in a black suit with no tie, stopped on the other side of the bars and looked me up and down, as if I were an auction item he wasn't sure he wanted to bid on. And you are? His voice was dry. Ottavia Romano. Bastian. He pointed to himself. You can wait 3 minutes. I waited. I looked at the mansion. It had 3 floors, a large garden, 2 old trees that scraped the second-floor windows with branches thin as fingers. The windows reflected the lead-colored sky and let nothing of the inside be seen. Everything about it seemed built to survive things that other houses wouldn't survive. Bastian came back. He opened the gate without ceremony. He'll see you. He gestured with his head. Don't touch anything. I walked across the gravel with my belly still invisible beneath my coat. My low heels sank a little with each step, the small sound of my footsteps lost in the vastness of the garden. My heart was beating where it used to beat, when I still lived with Lucian, and heard his key turn in the lock at night, that pressure behind my sternum that wasn't exactly fear, but was a close relative. We went in through a double door. The hall was pale marble, the walls covered in dark wallpaper with a geometric pattern that absorbed the light of the side sconces. An enormous chandelier hung from a height that made you not want to look up. Bastian led me down a short corridor and opened a double door into a room so large it took me a second to see the people. There were 10 of them. They were standing, with glasses in their hands, in small groups around a long, dark oak table. They were speaking quietly among themselves, the sound of their voices mixing with the discreet clink of ice in the glasses. Some turned their heads when I came in, others didn't. At the far end of the room, with his back to me, his hand resting on the back of a chair and his dark suit falling perfectly over his shoulders, was him. He turned slowly, and he recognized me. I saw the recognition cross his face in a blink, a minimal spasm at the corner of his mouth, a movement of the jaw he tried to hold and couldn't. The eyes were the same ones from the Belmore, and at the same time they were different. In that New York lobby, he had been a tired man in an armchair. Here, he was the reason the room had fallen silent when I came in, even though none of them yet knew why. Leave, he said. No one moved. I said, leave. The men set their glasses on the table and began to move. It wasn't fast. It was the choreography of people used to obeying without letting it show that they obey. In 30 seconds, the room had only 3 people. Him, Bastian against the wall, and me. What do you want here? His voice came out lower than at the Belmore, and more dangerous. I need to talk to you. I gripped the strap of my bag. Alone. Bastian stays. I looked at Bastian. He had crossed his arms and seemed to have turned into a wall. Fine, I said. He walked toward me. Not fast. It was the kind of walk of a man who knew exactly how much fear he caused with every step, his heavy shoes echoing on the room's waxed floor. He stopped 3 meters away from me. Speak. I swallowed. The air in the room smelled of polished wood and some men's cologne that had lingered after the others left. Dense and quiet, like the silence that had stayed along with it. I'm pregnant. The sentence cut through the silence without being cushioned by anything. I saw Bastian's hand drop a centimeter along his body. I saw his jaw harden. I saw his shoulders rise a millimeter and lock there, as if his whole body had decided to reveal nothing more. Whose? The question came out hoarse. What do you mean? Whose? Whose? He took a step. You show up at my house without warning. You say a sentence like that in front of my men, in front of my captain, and you think I'm going to ask whether you'd like tea. I didn't come to ask for anything. Who got you pregnant? The question came again, louder, and this time it cut the room in two. I could feel the gaze of Bastian, his captain, on the back of my neck. I could feel the blood at my temple. I could feel the baby inside me as if, in that second, it were the only solid thing in the room. I thought about Lucian. I thought about 3 years ago, in the kitchen of his apartment, when he asked me where I'd been, and I answered, and he didn't believe me. I thought about how much time I'd spent trying to explain, justify, prove things to men who had already decided on their version before hearing me out. I thought about how this stance, feet planted, gaze fixed, the question asked, as if the answer were already guilt, was far too familiar to frighten me the way it should have. I wasn't going to explain again. I lifted my chin. I looked him right in the eyes, and I said the only sentence that fit inside my chest. The same man who's asking me that. The room stopped. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical stop. The clock on the wall kept ticking because a clock has no choice. But everything else, the air, the breathing, Bastian's glass, the dust in the chandelier's light, everything hung on the next second as if it were waiting for permission to move again. Gennaro looked at me. I looked back. The color of his face didn't change. His eyes did. Something inside slipped a centimeter and he couldn't hold it. Bastian peeled himself off the wall. Slowly. Boss, he said. Gennaro raised a hand. Bastian stopped where he was. For 10 seconds, no one breathed. No one, Gennaro said, without taking his eyes off me. No one leaves this house until further notice. Chapter 3. The Woman Who Wants Nothing. I woke up not knowing where I was. The ceiling was too high, with plaster moldings that looked like they came out of an old architecture book, and the sheets smelled of expensive lavender, the kind you buy in frosted glass jars. It took me 3 seconds to remember the night before, the room emptying, Gennaro's order that no one would leave the house until further notice, Bastian leading me down the east corridor in silence, opening a dark wooden door at the end, saying only, "Here," and closing the door behind me without looking at me. The guest room of the Caputo mansion. I hadn't unpacked because I had no luggage. I had slept in my clothes on top of the covers, and at some point in the early morning dragged myself under the duvet like a tired animal. I wasn't a guest. I was a suspect. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath, my hand open over the belly that still barely showed beneath my crumpled dress. 3 months of pregnancy gave me no belly at all. They gave me nausea, sleep at all the wrong hours, and a constant feeling that my own body had become a foreign country whose language I didn't yet speak. I looked at the door. There was no key on my side. I thought about testing the handle and gave up. If it was locked, I'd feel trapped. If it was open, I'd have to decide what to do with the freedom, and I didn't have the energy to decide anything before coffee. I got up. I washed my face in the white marble sink. I looked at my reflection for a second and almost laughed at my own face. Dark circles down to my chin. Hair held in place by 2 days of dried paint. The black dress I'd chosen thinking it would command respect, and now looked like a crumpled joke. I opened the door. It wasn't locked. I went out into the corridor barefoot, my shoes hanging in one hand, because sleeping 8 hours in low heels was the kind of thing I hadn't done since I was 25. The carpet muffled my steps. The walls had paintings, good restorations, I noticed without meaning to, and 2 blatant Caravaggio forgeries that no one there must have known were fake. I found the kitchen by the smell of bread. It was an enormous room, with a dark granite counter, copper pots hanging from the ceiling, and a woman of about 60 peeling potatoes in a corner, an apron tied twice around her thin waist. She looked at me. She said nothing. She gestured with her chin toward the coffee maker. "May I?" I asked. She nodded and went back to the potatoes. I poured the coffee into a white cup, without ceremony. I sat on a stool at the counter, and took the first sip looking at the steam. It was strong the way Italians like it. It was good. It was at that exact second that Bastian appeared in the doorway. "Good morning," he said, with that low voice of someone who never shouts because he's never had to. "Good morning," He looked at the cup in my hand as if I'd stolen the queen's crown. You helped yourself. You'd have waited 3 hours if I hadn't. The cook let out a short laugh through her nose and pretended it had been a cough. Bastien looked at her, then at me, and his mouth made a minimal movement at the corner, almost a smile, but controlled in time. The boss will want to speak with you after coffee. The boss knows where to find me. Bastien tilted his head 1/2 centimeter, like someone noting a point, and left. I drank the rest of the coffee slowly. The cook offered me bread and butter without saying a word. I accepted without saying a word. I ate, looking at the garden through the tall window, the morning light hitting the leaves of an oak that must have been older than that whole family put together. For 2 minutes, I thought about nothing. It was the first time in 3 months. Then the hand on my belly reminded me of everything at once. Upstairs, in some office I hadn't yet seen, Gennaro Caputo was deciding what to do with me. I didn't need to hear a single syllable to understand the subject. I washed the cup in the sink. The cook looked at me as if I'd really spat on the queen's crown this time. Habit? I said, with half a smile. She shook her head and went back to the potatoes. I went up the stairs, putting my shoes on at the 5th step, because walking barefoot in front of men who carried guns was a Sunday luxury, not a Monday one. In the corridor, I stopped in front of the dark wooden double door. I couldn't hear anything from inside, only a low, muffled vibration that could have been a voice or could have been nothing. I didn't knock. I went back to my room. I sat in the armchair. I waited. Waiting is something I know how to do well. I learned to wait with Lucien Voss over 2 years, waiting for him to come home, waiting for him to explain, waiting for him to apologize, waiting for the next time he'd bring me to my knees without laying a hand on me. I learned so well that, when I finally walked out of that house with a backpack and an empty account, I swore I'd wait for the rest of my life for myself alone. And there I was, sitting in a green velvet armchair, waiting for the next man to decide what to do with me. I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. There's an economy of tears you learn early, when crying becomes currency, and the man learns to spend it. The day passed strangely. Gennaro didn't call for me. Bastien appeared at lunchtime with a tray. In the afternoon, a staff member knocked on the door with 2 changes of clothes, loose blouses, light fabric pants, with a label from a brand I'd see in magazines, and pretend didn't interest me. "Whose are these?" I asked. The young woman lowered her eyes. "The boss ordered them." I returned the clothes with a calm that cost more energy than I had. "But tell the boss thank you very much, but I have clothes in Boston." She hesitated. "You're not going back to Boston." I looked at her. She was about 20, maybe less, and she was afraid of me, or of Gennaro, or of both at the same time. It wasn't her fault. "Tell the boss," I repeated, in a lower voice, "that I have clothes in Boston." She left with the blouses over her arm. I sat on the bed. He had decided I wouldn't go back, and he hadn't asked me. At night, Bastien knocked on the door. "The boss asks that you come down to the garden." I looked at the clock. 11 o'clock. "Tell him I'll come at my own pace." It took me 10 minutes. I swapped the crumpled dress for another crumpled dress from the same suitcase. I went down the side stairs, crossed the empty dining room, opened the French door that led to the back porch, and went out to the lawn. Gennaro was standing near the oak, his back to me, hands in his trouser pockets, his jacket open. I came to within 2 steps of him and stopped. "You asked?" I said. He turned slowly. The garden light came from low lanterns on the ground. Half his face was in shadow. His eyes, in the lit part, were more tired than furious, and that bothered me more than if they'd only been furious. "Sit," he said, gesturing to an iron bench near the fountain. "I'd rather stand." He looked at me for a long second. "Sit, Ottavia." I sat, not because he ordered it, because my lower back had been complaining for 3 hours and I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of knowing it. "I had everything about you investigated," he said. "I figured. I know you saved up to rent a smaller apartment in Boston. I know you didn't ask anyone for money. I know you didn't go to the press. You didn't ask for protection." I looked at him. "Ask who?" He didn't answer immediately. "You could have asked." "I didn't come to ask." "I know." There was a silence. I heard the fountain. I heard the wind. "Why did you order clothes for me?" I asked. "Because you only have 1 suitcase. I have an apartment. One you were going to give up." I swallowed hard. "You decided that for me." "I decided you're not going back," he said, simply, "until I understand who you are within my world, and what am I within your world, that I don't know yet either." I stood up. "Then good night." "Ottavia." I stopped. I didn't turn. "I'll go with you to the next appointment," he said, behind me. I've already told the doctor. I turned slowly. You decided that without asking me. I did. Why? He used the silence as a tool, and every pause was a sentence he was choosing not to say. Because it's my child too, he said, at last. It was the first time he admitted, out loud, that he was the father. I couldn't respond. I gripped my belly without realizing it. He saw the gesture and looked away toward the fountain as if it had hurt him. Good night, Mr. Caputo, I said. Gennaro. Good night, Mr. Caputo, I repeated. I climbed the stone steps without looking back. 2 days later, he accompanied me to the office of Dr. Lenore Whitfield in a discreet building in downtown Philadelphia. Armored car, 20 minutes, a silent driver. He sat beside me in the back seat and said nothing the whole way. The doctor applied the cold gel to my belly, positioned the device, and the sound filled the room before I saw the image. A fast gallop. Beat, 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 beat. I'd read in a book that it sounded like that. I wasn't prepared for what it would do to me. I looked at Gennaro. He was leaning against the wall beside the door, his arms crossed, and his face had come undone on the inside in a way he hadn't yet learned to hide. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at me, as if the screen mattered less than seeing what I was feeling at hearing that sound. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, he had already straightened his posture, gone back to being the man from the room, but I'd seen it, and he knew I'd seen it. The doctor explained about 13 weeks, heartbeat within range, everything fine. In the car on the way back, at a certain point in the traffic, he turned his face toward me, and I pretended I was looking at the street, but I saw it in the reflection of the glass. It was the look of a man who didn't know what to do with what he'd just discovered. The week passed like that. I learned the cook's name, Donata, and she started leaving a cup set aside for me on the counter every morning. Gennaro called me to the garden almost every night, always after 10, always the same iron bench. He asked me about my father, about Boston, about why I'd chosen restoration. I answered those things and deflected the rest with a bitter joke about men who ask questions they had no right to ask. He accepted the jokes. He laughed once, quietly, and it seemed to me that the laugh frightened him as much as it did me. One of those nights he asked, "Why didn't you ask for money?" "Because I didn't come for money." "I know. I'm asking why." I thought of the truth, not a pretty word. "Because I depended on a man once," I said. "And when I left with a backpack and an empty account. I'm not going to start a second time with the same door open." "What man?" I swallowed hard. "Another day, I'll tell you." He didn't push, and I was grateful, in silence, that he was the first person in 3 years not to force an answer out of me. I went back to my room that night and slept without dreaming. It was in the early morning that everything changed. I woke to low voices in the corridor. The clock read 3:17. There was a band of yellow light under my door. I got up. I opened it a crack. Matteo Greco was walking toward Gennaro's office with a manila envelope in his hand, and the whitest face I'd ever seen on a man of 50. Bastian came behind, silent. They went in. The door closed. I stood there with my hand on the handle, not understanding why my whole body was on alert. I didn't hear what they discussed. That kind of mansion has walls built so no one hears anything from one room to the next. But I knew, from Matteo's face, from the hour, from the envelope. I went back to bed. I lay on my back, my hand on my belly, listening to the silence of the enormous house breathe around me, thinking that life hadn't been good to Ottavia Romano for long stretches at a time, and that maybe that envelope was the announcement of the next time it would remind me of it. The corridor light went off half an hour later. The door to Gennaro's office didn't open again until dawn. Chapter 4. The Name That Changed Everything. I woke to a knock on the door. It was morning, a little past 7. Light came through the poorly closed curtain and drew a golden band on the wooden floor, and for a second I didn't remember where I was, and the knock came again. 3 short, precise taps. "Ma'am," Bastian's voice whooped from outside. "The boss asks that you come down. Now." I got up. I washed my face with cold water, the kind of cold that really wakes you. I put on a light dress, the same one I'd washed in the basin 2 days earlier because I refused to accept the new clothes. I ran my fingers through my hair and went down. Gennaro's office was a large room at the end of the east corridor, with dark wood-paneled walls and the smell of old paper, of leather, and of something that only exists in places where heavy decisions have been made over decades. The oak desk, the size of a small car, took up the center of the room, and the 2 tall windows that looked out onto the garden let in a cold early morning light. He was sitting behind the desk when I came in. He didn't stand. He gestured to the chair on the other side with a short motion. Matteo was standing near the window, arms crossed. Bastian closed the door behind me and stayed on the inside, leaning against the wood. I sat. On the desk, between Gennaro and me, was an open manila envelope, with 3 photographs beside it, and a document folded in 3. I looked at the envelope. I looked at him. "Good morning," I said. He didn't answer. Lucien Voss. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. I froze. I must have gone 3 seconds without breathing, because I saw Gennaro's hand slowly close on the desk. I saw Matteo peel himself off the window a centimeter. I saw Bastian uncross his arms behind me, and I realized that the silence with which I'd answered had already said everything. "I can explain," I began. "You will explain," he cut in, with the lowest voice he'd used with me so far. His low voice frightened me far more than if he'd shouted. "I dated Lucien Voss for 2 years," I said. "It was the relationship that ended 3 years ago. The relationship because of which I left home with a backpack. And you didn't think it was worth mentioning." "I didn't know it was." He leaned forward, slowly. "Do you know who Lucien Voss is to me?" "I didn't know you knew him." There was a second when he seemed to want to laugh. It wasn't a laugh. It was something else, something colder and more controlled than humor. "Lucien Voss," he said, his voice clipped, "has been my family's greatest enemy for 9 years. The man I suspect ordered my younger brother killed in an ambush 9 years ago. The man for whom I would give half my fortune to see buried." I didn't blink. I didn't know that. No, I swear I didn't know. He looked at me. And for the first time since I'd walked into that mansion, I saw on his face something I recognized up close. The look of a man deciding whether the woman in front of him is a trap. I'd seen that look before, but it had come from Lucien, and the reason was inverted. Gennaro looked at me that way because his whole life had taught him that a beautiful woman showing up pregnant at his door was an enemy's move, and the enemy, now, had a name. "Bar, why didn't you tell me?" he asked, low. "Because I didn't know it mattered. When I met Lucien, he introduced himself as a businessman in finance. I never heard the word Caputo come out of his mouth. I never heard your brother's name. And what did you hear?" I swallowed hard. Promises for 6 months, then shouting for a year, then the front door closing behind me and the vow never to hear that voice again in my life. He didn't answer. "You've already investigated," I said, slowly. "You already know what I didn't do, what I didn't ask for, where I didn't go. You can have it investigated again. You can do it 3 times. I have nothing to do with Lucien Voss. I have a man who hit me, and about whom I stayed silent because I was ashamed to admit I accepted that for more than a year." He stood up. He walked to the window with tense shoulders and stayed with his back to me, his eyes on the garden outside where the morning was still cold. Matteo came to the edge of the desk and rested his hands on the oak. "Ms. Romano, I'm going to ask for some dates, locations, names of people who can confirm what you've just said, not as an accusation, as routine." "I accept." He took a notebook from the inside pocket of his jacket. He began asking. I answered everything. Dates, addresses, the name of the building manager where I lived with Lucien, the names of 2 friends who had helped me move, the name of the hospital where I'd gone to an ER one night and lied about having fallen down the stairs, the doctor's name, the name of the social worker who had tried to talk to me in the hallway and whom I'd dismissed by saying everything was fine. Each name came out of my mouth as if I were returning a lost key. Gennaro kept his back to me the whole time. When Matteo put the notebook away and left, the office was left with only the weight of old wood and ancient paper. I waited. He didn't turn. In the end, I got up, went to the door, and stopped with my hand on the handle. "Gennaro," I said. The first time I called him by his name, he turned half his face. Only half. I rolled up the sleeve of my dress to the elbow. I showed my left forearm, the thin, white, long scar, from the elbow to nearly the wrist, that I had kept beneath long sleeves for 3 years. It was the first time I'd shown that to a man who wasn't a doctor. This wasn't from a fall. He looked. I saw his jaw lock. I saw his hand close at his side. I saw something on his face I couldn't name, and that hurt more than if he'd called me a liar. I left. I went back to my room and closed the door carefully. I sat in the armchair by the window. I didn't cry. I thought about Sienna, about Boston, about the small apartment I wanted to rent. I thought about the baby, about the sound of the heartbeat. I thought about leaving. I didn't leave. The door was open. There was no guard. I knew that. But the part inside me that had sworn never again to depend on any man was in conflict with another part, newer and more dangerous, that had seen his face come undone at the doctor's office when he looked at me instead of looking at the screen. I stayed. I slept the rest of the morning. 3 days later, Matteo appeared in the living room where I was leafing through an exhibition catalog I'd found on a shelf. He sat in the armchair across from me, without ceremony. "The investigation confirmed everything," he said. "I already knew. So did I. But the boss needed to hear it. Has he heard it?" "He's read it." Half a smile. "It's not the same thing, but it's the best we can do for now." A second of silence between us. "Mr. Romano, I wanted you to know one thing. I've worked with Gennaro Caputo for 15 years. I've never seen this man investigate a person 3 times in a row. He investigates once. When that's not enough, he closes it out. This is the 3rd time he's asked me to redo the checks." I looked at the book in my lap. "He wanted it to come out wrong," I said. "No," Matteo answered. "He wanted it to come out right." He stood up. He left. That afternoon, I accepted a project. It was a small thing. A private gallery in downtown Philadelphia needed a restorer to assess 3 canvases from a family collection. Matteo had passed along the contact days earlier, after I told Gennaro I'd go crazy if I went another week without a brush in my hand, and I needed to have a room outside the Caputo mansion where I was just Ottavia Romano, with a brush, a magnifying glass, and professional silence. Bastian drove me there. I worked for 3 hours. Good light, good materials, canvases cleaner than I expected, with paint in layers that demanded patience more than skill. When I left, the sun was starting to drop, and the Philadelphia air smelled of an early autumn, of that cold mix of wet earth and concrete that reminded me of walking quickly to get home. It was at that moment that I heard the voice, "Ottavia." I wasn't startled. Worse than startled, I recognized the voice the second it reached me, and my body knew exactly what to do. It locked my shoulders, widened my stance, lifted my chin. 3 years of distance, and nothing had been unlearned. I turned. Lucian Voss was leaning against a black car on the other side of the sidewalk. Light gray suit, no tie, 2 buttons undone, a small, calm, rehearsed smile. Before he took the first step in my direction, Bastian was already between us, shoulder turned, his right hand open at waist height, not yet touching the holster but making clear where it was. "I didn't expect to find you here," Lucien said over Bastian's shoulder, in the voice of someone who knew very well he had expected it. "Get out of her way," Bastian answered, low, before I could speak. Lucien laughed without sound. He didn't come any closer. 2 men in black jackets were getting out of another car half a block up, also his. For a second, the entire sidewalk breathed in the rhythm of a shooting range. "I heard you're staying in an interesting place," Lucien said, still looking at me over Bastian's shoulder. "Think carefully about who you've chosen," he said. "I didn't choose anyone." He tilted his head half a centimeter. A note of threat, bored control, the patience of a man who always thought he'd win. "I'll come find you again. If you do, you won't find me alone." He got into the black car. He shut the door. The car pulled away slowly, as if it had all the time in the world. I stood on the sidewalk with my bag hanging from my shoulder and my knees trembling in a way I hadn't felt in 3 years. Bastian crossed the street, came close to me without touching me. "To the car," he said quietly, slowly. I walked to the car. I got in. I sat down. He closed the door, walked around, started the engine without hurry. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right?" "I am." "You're not." "I'm not." "Let's go home." I looked out the rear window. There was no car behind us, but I knew, with the precision of people who have been hit, that this didn't mean no one was watching me. Lucian Voss had seen me, and Lucian Voss never let anyone walk away twice in the same lifetime. The early morning came with a fine rain, the kind that makes no sound but leaves everything damp and heavy. I told Gennaro what had happened in the gallery's parking lot as soon as I got there. He listened, standing up, hands in his pockets, without interrupting me. When I finished, he said only, "Go rest." I went. I slept badly. I dreamed of the baby's heartbeat, of Lucian's hand on the back of my neck, of Gennaro turning his face to the office window without ever fully turning toward me. I woke to a knock on the door. 4:02. "Ma'am," Bastian, from outside, "the boss asks that you come down." I put on the robe. I slipped on my slippers. I crossed the corridor with the light off, guided only by the brightness coming from the far end. The office had its light on and smelled of strong coffee and printed paper. Matteo was there. Bastian, too, another man I didn't know, with the look of someone who hadn't slept. On the desk, a phone on speaker and an open envelope. Gennaro was standing behind the desk. He looked at me when I came in. "Edgar Pratt," he said without a greeting. "Who?" "The family's accountant. He disappeared 4 hours ago. He was kidnapped." I stood still in the doorway. "I'm sorry." I said, low. You're sorry. He pushed the envelope toward me. I came closer. I looked. Photographs. Me, in the gallery parking lot, talking to Lucian. Me, on the back sidewalk, buying coffee at a bakery. Me, coming down the mansion stairs. On top of each photograph, a red line. On top of the last one, a phone number. This phone, he said, was used to arrange Edgar's kidnapping. I looked at him. I looked at Matteo. I looked at Bastian. I didn't do this. Gennaro looked at me. The whole room looked at me. And I saw, on his face, the instant when the man decided he was going to go up the stairs after me with a decision in hand. And in that second, I didn't know whether the decision was to protect me or to hand me over. Chapter 5. Believing Before the Proof. I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair by the guest room window, my hands over my belly, listening to the wall clock measure a time that seemed not to pass. The low light of the lamp left the room the color of old honey, and the garden outside was black. No wind, no cricket, nothing. I had heard Matteo's voice in the corridor at dawn. I had heard the office door close with that dry thud Gennaro used when he was deciding something heavy. And then, footsteps on the stairs. I knew his footsteps now. It was a ridiculous detail to admit, but it was true. I knew when he came up fast, when he came up slowly, when he stopped in the middle of a step to think. The rhythm of his footsteps had been etched into me without my asking. That early morning, he came up slowly. He stopped in front of my room door for long seconds. I didn't move. I waited for the sound of the handle without knowing what to expect anymore. Whether a man who was going to protect me or a man who was going to hand me over. It was the same door. It was the same corridor. It was the same silence in which I'd lived the whole week. The door opened without hurry. Gennaro came in, white shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled up to the elbow, a brown folder under his arm. His eyes were dark with exhaustion, but they weren't the eyes of someone coming to fight. They were the eyes of someone who had walked against his own will all the way there. You didn't sleep, he said. Neither did you. He closed the door behind him, slowly, without making a sound. Then he crossed the room and stopped a step from the armchair, without sitting. Edgar Pratt was kidnapped last night, he continued. The family's accountant. They took the entire folder of documents from the port operation. I know. Bastian told me. Things were planted. Ottavia. His voice came out without weight, like someone dropping a stone on the ground and waiting for the sound. I didn't look away. What things? He opened the brown folder on the small table beside the armchair. I looked without moving. I saw photographs of me leaving the temporary projects gallery. I saw photographs of me crossing a Philadelphia street I didn't even remember crossing. I saw a paper that looked like a bank transfer receipt in my name, to an account abroad I'd never opened. I saw a piece of a text conversation in which my number appeared exchanging addresses with someone called L. It was all well done. It was all too clean. I felt my heart rise to the base of my throat, but I didn't take my hand off my belly. The palm stayed over the fabric of the robe, over the weight that was there, and it was the only thing that kept me still. It wasn't me, I said. I don't need to explain more than that, because I just saw it now, but it wasn't me. Gennaro looked at me for a long while. I can't say how long. Time in the early morning has no exact measure. He pulled a wooden chair that was against the wall and placed it in front of the armchair. Without touching my knees, without invading the patch of floor I had to myself, he sat. He rested his elbows on his own thighs. He clasped his hands, and then he asked a question I had never imagined hearing from the mouth of a man like him. Did you have anything to do with this, Ottavia? It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a trap. It was a bare question, almost asked with care, like someone asking a child if she's the one who broke the kitchen glass, knowing the answer will be heard from beginning to end. No, I answered. He lowered his head for a second. When he raised it again, there was something different in his face, something I'd never seen before in any man in my life. Then I believe you, I cried without warning. It wasn't a movie cry, with sobs and a hand over my mouth. It was a silent cry, the kind that comes down your face before you understand you're crying. The tears fell onto the dark robe, darkening the fabric more, and I didn't raise my hand to wipe them away because, if I did, I'd discover I was trembling. Gennaro didn't hug me. He didn't try. I was grateful in silence, because any touch there would have broken me in half. He got up from the chair, went to the opposite wall, sat on the floor. He leaned his back against the cold wood, stretched his long legs out in front of him, crossed his ankles. He stayed there. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just stayed. It was the most caring thing anyone had ever done for me. I watched the sky change color through the window, first a very deep blue, then gray, then a thin slice of orange on the horizon behind the garden pines. At some point, I stopped crying. At some point, he pulled his phone from his pocket and sent a short message. At some point, Bastian knocked twice on the door and Gennaro left without saying goodbye. But before going out, he looked at me and said, "Don't leave here today. Not out of distrust. For safety." I nodded. "I'm going to bring Edgar back," he added. "And the man who did this to you." The door closed. I sat in the armchair, listening to the house wake up. Footsteps in the corridor. Low voices. A car engine in the yard. Another engine. Another. At some point, Bastian appeared with a tray, black coffee, and 2 pieces of buttered toast, and he said only one sentence before going out again. He'd never asked anyone for that, you know. For what? To believe in him. The operation lasted all day. I stayed inside the mansion, not for the reason Bastian had implied, safety, but because I had no desire to cross the front door without knowing whether the man who had sat on the floor until dawn would come back. Sienna called 3 times on the mansion's landline, because the night before Gennaro had asked for my cell phone for the first time, just for today, until we understand where the photo came from, and I'd handed it over without arguing, for the first time too. In 2 of the calls, she asked if I wanted her to catch the first train. I said no. On the 3rd call, she said she'd sold 3 sacred restorations that very week, and wanted to celebrate by drinking champagne on the porch of my house in Boston. I laughed for 2 seconds. It was the first time in a whole week that any muscle in my face moved of its own accord. "They're going to find the man," Sienna said. "I don't know your mafia boss, but I know you. You don't pick the wrong person twice." I hung up without answering, because the sentence was too big for me to carry. In the afternoon, Matteo arrived from outside with a preliminary arrest warrant against me under his arm, dated 2 hours earlier, made by Lucian's contacts inside the system, so that if I tried to leave Philadelphia, I'd be held. Bastian told me later, low, in the corridor. Matteo had burned it in the office fireplace without saying a word. It was already night when I heard the gate. Bastian told me everything afterward, sitting in the armchair across from mine, without taking off his coat, with Camden dirt still on the hem of his pants. There were 2 warehouses. The first, empty for hours. The second, at the back of the port, with 3 armed men at the door, and a 4th, thinner, holding a brown folder as if it were the only thing still connecting him to the world. The entry was fast. 2 shots. None from Gennaro's side. Edgar Pratt found tied to a metal chair, with an improvised bandage on his forehead and his glasses crooked on his chest. The name of the inside informant came out of his mouth before they even untied his wrists. Cars came into the yard. 1, 2, 3. I saw the silhouettes through the window. Bastian getting out of the first. Vincenzo getting out of the second. A 3rd man holding Edgar up by the elbow. And right behind, Gennaro getting out of the last car. Dark coat down to the knee. No visible mark. But with a weight on his shoulders I recognized from my own skin. He saw me at the 2nd floor window. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stopped in the middle of the yard, lifted his chin, and stood looking at me for 2 long seconds, until Bastian said something I didn't hear. 2 days later, it was the porch. I hadn't asked. He hadn't warned me. It was just late afternoon. The garden was lit by those low wrought iron lanterns in the flower bed, and the wind had that clean October cold that came up under your coat and called for silence. He appeared with 2 cups. "Chamomile," he said, handing one to me. "Dr. Whitfield sent word through her secretary. She said you should sleep more. You called her." I did. I sat on the stone bench against the porch wall. He sat beside me, but with a sensible distance between our bodies, the kind that says more than a hug. The stone was cold even through my coat. I held the cup with both hands. We stayed silent for a while. The baby kicked twice. I didn't comment. "Ottavia," he began. It was the first time he'd said my name calmly. Before it had always been an order, a question or irony. Now it was just my name, like someone holding something fragile with care. "I've apologized to 3 people in my life," he continued. "To my mother, when I was 12, to my brother, 2 days before he died, and to no one else." I didn't answer. "I'm apologizing to you now." I swallowed the chamomile. It was very hot. It burned. I was grateful for the burn because it gave me an excuse for having damp eyes. "I accept," I said, "but I also have something to ask you." "Ask. Don't test me like that again. You can investigate me. You can check on me. You can even distrust me if you want, in the silence of your own head. But don't throw me into the center of a room again. I can't take it another time." He turned his face toward me. The light of the nearest lantern crossed his eyes, And I saw, for a short instant, that this man feared by an entire city was afraid, truly afraid of the size of what he was now allowing himself. "There won't be another time," he said. He came a little closer. Not much. Enough that I felt the warmth of his arm against mine through the fabric. He raised his hand slowly, without hurry, and lightly touched the corner of my mouth with the tip of his thumb, like someone testing whether I was still made of flesh. I closed my eyes. When the kiss came, it was calm, without hunger, without testing. It was the kiss of someone who had decided something important and was just signing the paper. His hand stayed on my face. Mine stayed on the cup, because if I let go of the cup, I wouldn't know what to do with my hands anymore. When he pulled back a little, his forehead still against mine, he said softly, "Come with me." I said yes, with my head before the yes became a word. He stood up. He took my cup, set the two of them on the stone edge. He held out his hand. I took it. We crossed the porch, the corridor with the yellow light of the low sconces, the staircase I'd climbed so many times that week of lead. At the top of the stairs, at the door of the master bedroom, he stopped for a second, looked at me as if giving me one last chance to change my mind. I didn't change it. The door closed behind us. The morning came clear. I woke to the smell of coffee crossing the room, coming from the kitchen downstairs. It was a new smell in the house, different from the coffee the staff made at 6 in the morning. Stronger, darker. I knew, without having to check, that no one on the staff had made that coffee. I got up slowly, took his robe from the back of the chair, because mine was somewhere in the room I didn't have the head to look for, and went down. Gennaro was standing with his back to me at the kitchen island, barefoot, dark pajama pants, a simple white t-shirt. He had a cup in his hand. He was looking at the garden through the glass door, and the morning light came in from the side, cutting the marble floor into bright bands. He heard my steps. He didn't turn right away. He waited for me to come close. When he turned, he offered me the cup that was in his hand. Not his, mine, already made. Already at the point I'd shown him offhandedly, in the first week, when he'd seen me make coffee on my own for the first time in the life of the house. I took it. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." He held out his other hand. I placed mine over his, on the cold stone of the island. His fingers squeezed mine for a fraction of a second. It was enough. My belly tightened a little. I smiled without meaning to. He noticed. "What?" "6th month," I said. "It started today." He looked at my hand over his, then at my belly, then at me. He said nothing, but something behind his eyes settled into a place that hadn't been there before. The kitchen smelled of coffee and morning, and for the first time in a long while, so did I. Chapter 6. The House That Was Ours. 3 weeks passed, the way they only pass when life decides to be good on purpose. I woke up late, because the baby had decided he was nocturnal, and kicked me until 3 in the morning with an aim he'd clearly inherited from his father. I had coffee in the kitchen with Gennaro, who relearned how to read the newspaper without furrowing his brow in hatred. I walked through the garden in the afternoon, with Bastian about 10 steps away, pretending to be interested in the rose bushes while he watched the street. I slept early. I woke with his hand in the middle of my back, in a spot that ached without my knowing it ached. Sienna landed on a Thursday afternoon, after the days of checks Matteo conducted without telling me. A clean past, no connection to Lucian, cleared to stay 3 days. I only learned about the check on the morning of her trip, when Bastian mentioned it in passing over coffee, without any guilt. She arrived with 2 suitcases, 3 bottles of Italian olive oil she swore were essential for an 8th-month pregnant woman, and a shiny purple dress that, according to her, was discreet for Mafia events. "You've never been to a Mafia event," I said, opening the door for her. "I've seen movies." "It's the same thing." She hugged me over the belly. She smelled my neck. She stepped back half a pace, like someone needing distance to see an entire work. She looked at me with that restorer's eye that could spot fresh varnish on an old painting from 3 meters away. "Ottavia." "What? You're sleeping." "I am. You're really sleeping." "I am." She laughed. It was a laugh I hadn't heard since college, the kind that came from deep down, without permission, without needing to announce it was coming. "I knew that if I pushed you onto a train with a positive test in your bag, something good would come out of it," she said. I didn't know what, but I knew. That night, over dinner, she met Gennaro. I expected anything but what happened. Sienna sat in the chair across from him, stared at the most feared man in Philadelphia for 2 long, deliberate seconds, and said, "You made her laugh." "I did. Keep doing it." "I try." "Don't try. Do." Gennaro, to my eternal shock, smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that lasts a fraction of a second before the face remembers where it is. But I saw it. Bastian, who had walked in with a bottle of wine at the wrong moment, stopped in the dining room doorway, looked at the scene, and said in a low voice, more to himself than to any of us, "That's all we needed." It was the next morning that Gennaro led me by the eyes. I had just gotten out of the shower when he came into the room with a black silk ribbon in his hand. I looked at the ribbon. I looked at him. I raised an eyebrow. "It's not what you're thinking," he said. "Pity," he laughed. It was the second time in 24 hours. I was starting to think I'd broken something important in his architecture, some beam that held up the ceiling of his permanent control. "It's a surprise," he continued. "I wanted you to see it all at once, not piece by piece. You're a dramatic man, Gennaro Caputo." "I know." He tied the ribbon carefully. His fingers ran through my damp hair without any hurry, lingering longer than they needed to, as if the path to the knot mattered as much as the knot. He took my hand. He led me down the corridor, through a door I knew existed, but that was always closed, through a new smell of paint that had lingered in my lungs over the last few days, without my being able to identify the source. He stopped. "You can take it off." I took off the ribbon. The room was yellow, not the loud yellow of catalog nurseries. An early morning yellow washed out, with a hint of lighter paint near the ceiling, as if the color were losing strength as it rose, becoming softer where the eye rested. The furniture was simple wood, low, chosen without any of the Baroque flourishes that covered the rest of the mansion. The shelf was at my waist height. On top of it, a single framed photo, last week's ultrasound, with the small shadow of our son against a gray background. I couldn't speak. I walked through the room barefoot, running my hand along the edge of the dresser, along the back of the nursing chair he'd placed near the window. The chair had a small pillow on the seat, beige, with a fabric button in the center. Someone had thought of that detail. I touched the light curtain that filtered the sun into thin stripes on the wooden floor, feeling the fabric between my fingers, thin as paper. I touched the ultrasound photo. It was crooked. I straightened it with the tip of my finger. Then I thought better of it and tilted it back, the way it had been. I turned to him. Gennaro was standing in the doorway, his hands at his sides, and his eyes were a way I'd never seen. There was no control there. There was no strategy. It was a man waiting to see whether the other person was going to like the gift. Just that, with nothing else underneath. "You painted it," I said. "I did. You yourself, myself." Bastian held the ladder. I laughed. I laughed crying, because there was no longer any room to choose between one thing and the other. I crossed the room and hugged him however I could, by the waist, under his arm, with the big belly between our two bodies, creating a space that was just ours. He hugged me back. His hand rose along my back and stopped at the nape of my neck, slowly, with a firm and quiet pressure. "There's a question I haven't asked you yet," he said, his voice low, speaking against my hair. "I know you noticed. I noticed. It's not because I don't want to ask. I know. It's because you're still pregnant in my house, surrounded by my men, with the Caputo name weighing on every wall. I don't want the answer now. I want it when you have somewhere to go back to and choose to stay." I pulled back a little. I looked at him. "Waiting is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me," I said. "Do you know that?" He said nothing. He just nodded slightly, a small movement that was more confession than any word. He took my hand and placed it on my belly, on the right side, where the baby usually stretched out a leg when he found us funny. We waited. Nothing came for a few seconds. The room went completely quiet, with the yellow morning light coming through the thin curtain, and I heard my own breathing. Then it came. It was a short kick, full of opinion. Gennaro's face changed in a way I'll keep until I die. His eyes widened a little. His mouth opened a finger's width without closing again. His breath caught in the middle of his chest as if he'd forgotten how it was done. It was the first time he felt his son. His hand stayed there, still, heavy and warm over my belly, as if moving would break the spell. The baby kicked again. "Strong," Gennaro said, low, just like his father. He looked at me. I held his gaze. "Just like you," he said. "Have you still not realized you're stronger than I am?" I didn't answer, because the answer would have brought me to the ground. In the afternoon, Sienna dragged us out to the porch. I had already learned that when Sienna decided something, it was easier to obey than to argue. She served tea in a teapot she'd found herself in a forgotten kitchen cabinet, sat cross-legged on the stone bench, and began a monologue about what her life would be like if she wrote a book about mine. Chapter 1, she said, waving the teaspoon. Distracted restorer bumps into a stranger in a hotel lobby. I already have the cover. I didn't bump into him distracted. You're pregnant by the stranger from the lobby, Otavia. I'm the one writing the book. Bastian passed by the porch at that moment, carrying a box that smelled of varnish. He stopped for 3 seconds to listen. He looked at Sienna like someone looking at a damaged painting and not yet sure whether it's worth restoring. He kept walking without saying anything. Sienna followed him with her eyes until he disappeared through the side door. Does that one ever talk? He talks, I answered. And just not to you. I'm going to fix that. Please don't fix anything. Too late. I'm a restorer. It's instinct. Later, when Sienna went to shower before dinner, I heard Bastian commenting to Matteo in the entrance hall. The two of them thought they were alone. I was sitting on the other side of the wall, with the book closed in my lap, pretending to read. The boss painted a wall, Bastian said. You're delirious. With his own brush. I saw it. Bastian. I saw it. Matteo. Yellow paint. In his hair. I saw it. Matteo stayed silent for a stretch that seemed longer than it was. So it's serious, he said. Finally, it is. The footsteps moved away down the corridor. I put the book in my lap and stared at the opposite wall for a while, without reading, without thinking of anything with the shape of a thought. It was just a warm sensation in my chest, like sun coming through glass in winter. The sensation of no longer needing to check the exit door every day. At night, after dinner, I went back out to the porch with Gennaro. The lantern closest to us had started to flicker, blinking slowly as if telling itself an inside joke. I sat on the bench. He sat beside me. This time, without the sensible distance he usually kept in public. His hand found mine without needing to look. The baby was quiet. The garden was quiet, with the smell of damp earth rising from the nearest flower bed, and the distant sound of something that could have been wind, or could have been the city existing without us for a moment. The whole house was quiet, in a way that wasn't an absence of sound. It was a presence of peace. I noticed it, and almost laughed to myself, because I'd already forgotten what it was like. What are you thinking about? He asked. Nothing. Liar. Okay. About a small thing. Tell me. I looked at him from the side. The lantern's faint light left half his face lit, and the other half in the dark, and I found it beautiful, in a way I wouldn't be able to explain to Sienna later, because there was no right word or enough words. I was thinking the house became ours, I said. At some point I didn't see. He squeezed my hand. It was always yours, he said. You just took a while to realize it. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We stayed there until the lantern decided to give up for good and went out. The garden went dark, but the kitchen window back there stayed lit, and the light drew our shadows on the stone floor of the porch as if they were one. Later, when I went up to the master bathroom before bed, I stopped in front of the mirror. There was a small scratch on the frame, one I'd never noticed before. My wet hair dripped down my shoulder. My belly showed beneath his shirt, round, calm, with the familiar weight I could no longer imagine not having. I looked at my face. I thought, for a short second, that life had never been good to me for long stretches at a time, that good things in me lasted just long enough for me to get attached, and not a minute more. It was an old thought, worn at the edges from so much use, that came back out of habit more than reason, and then I laughed. I laughed at myself, quietly, at my old habit of waiting for the fall. It was an old thought that had come there out of custom, and no longer fit in that bathroom, nor in that belly, nor in that room where Gennaro lay on the other side of the door waiting for me to come back. I turned off the bathroom light. I crossed the room in the dark. I lay down. He found my hand without opening his eyes, and I slept. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee.
I believed I had won. Otavia carried my child in her belly. Our house echoed with laughter for the first time. And I, the man who lived on blood, dreamed of giving up the war for them. Then, in the middle of the announcement party, he appeared. My greatest enemy. A folder open on the main table, photos, tests, dates lined up like knives. He declared, his voice loud for everyone to hear, "The child is mine. The woman was always mine." The entire room stopped, eyes fixed on me. Octavia didn't scream. She didn't deny it. She didn't look at me. She just lowered her head, took his outstretched hand, and walked out at his side, silent steps cutting through the air like a sentence. I stood there, paralyzed, while the proof passed from hand to hand, while whispers turned into muffled laughter, while the empire I'd built watched my public dismantling. In that instant, I made the cruelest choice of my life. Afterward, the truth began to leak out in pieces, but it was already too late. There was something no one could give back to me, and I had already done it.
Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia Romance and Billionaire Romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.